Hello Internet, welcome to another Not stream. I don't know how they keep happening, they do. Anyway, today I'd like to talk about the kinds of stories that we choose to tell and not to tell in video games, and also the game Unpacking. Now, if you've missed it, Unpacking is an indie game, came out, I feel like tail end of 2021, maybe early 2022. I think people were playing it before Christmas. And if you haven't played it and want to play it and remain unspoiled, stop now, go play the game, come back. Okay, this is a fully spoilered discussion of Unpacking. With that in mind, here we go, spoilers. So, Unpacking is a little puzzle game where you are unpacking somebody's possessions at different stages of their life as they move house. Alright? And through this gameplay, through this puzzle gameplay, you find out who this person is, and also how their life progresses from the age of about 11 to their early 30s. So it's structured in a number of chapters. We start in 1997 when the character is 11 and they're moving into their first own bedroom. Next we're in 2004 when we go off to university at the age of 18. Then it's 2007, we've just graduated and we move into a shared house with some housemates, age 21. In 2010 the character moves in with a partner. It's a boyfriend, it's very clearly a boyfriend. It's a mail order sugar daddy, he's hilarious. So the character's 24 at that point, and by 2012 that relationship has ended and we see the character move back in with their mother at the age of 26. And very shortly after 2013, we've moved back out and we're moving into our first own house we've bought. In 2015, big plot twist, this is the big spoiler, a girlfriend moves in with us. And then in 2018, girlfriend and character have bought a house together and they've got a baby on the way. So that's, broadly speaking, the story of Unpacking as it unfolds through these house moves over the course of 20 odd years. And there is a lot to like about Unpacking. The gameplay is really relaxing, the music really complements it well, it's kind of very relaxing background music with engaging but not too difficult puzzle where you kind of get to vicariously live somebody's life through unpacking their possessions. The sound design is spectacular. The game includes 14,000 different sounds of different kinds of objects being placed on different kinds of surfaces. And of course, the innovative ambient storytelling, the amount of information we get about the character and their life just through unpacking their possessions, I really enjoyed that. It's a really nice, innovative, fresh way of telling that story, of following a character through a long chunk of their life as well. And they get to be a fully fleshed out character. They're a whole entire human with different interests that change over time. We see things that they retain over time. We see things that are kind of, oh, this part of our life hasn't made it with us through maybe college or whatever. It's interesting and I enjoyed it. But I also want to look at the kinds of stories that Unpacking chooses not to tell, and also the generally popular culture, video games, but also specifically Unpacking, the kinds of stories that we choose to tell and that we choose not to tell. So, who is the main character? Who's the protagonist of Unpacking? We find out about the protagonist through unpacking their stuff, and new information is revealed over the course of their life, and gradually over the course of the game. So, for instance, we don't find out the character's gender as soon as we meet them. We never see, or we see the character once at the very end, kind of from the back, with their partner, sat in the garden, and that's the only kind of shot we get of the character. Everything else we see about them is their possessions. And so in 1997, when they unpacked their first childhood bedroom, There's stuffed toys in there, there's a football and football trophies in there, there's books, there's art supplies, there's action figures, there's all sorts of things. You can make assumptions about the child's gender, but it's in no way confirmed or confirmable. Okay? We find out their gender in 2004 when they go off to college. And honestly, I really like that. I like that we get to kind of sit with this ambiguity and maybe interrogate our own assumptions about gender and children. So who is our protagonist? We do find out, and again, this is not... These pieces of information come together over pretty much the entire game. But our character is white, cisgender, bisexual, Jewish, a woman, from an upper middle class background, probably set in Australia. I'm kind of making an assumption about this because the developer's based in Australia. I would say the game is definitely not set in Europe. It could be North America, it could be Australia. The reason it's not set in Europe is that there is a big deal about Europe being a tourist destination throughout the game, and that's a recurring theme. And one of these demographic characteristics, so the character's bisexuality, is kind of the big reveal and plot twist of the game. We find out that she's bi after kind of her first relationship with a man ends, and again, Mel, the sugar daddy, is hilarious. She moves in with her mum, she moves back out, and eventually a girlfriend moves in with her. And that's kind of the reveal that, oh, she's bi. So who are we not? And how can we tell if we don't actually see the character until the very end? And how could, if we were those other people, how could that story be different? That's the thing that really struck me about Unpacking. So one of the first things that I noticed fairly early on is that the character is definitely not black and probably not a native indigenous person of colour. And an easy way to tell, or to kind of signal in this context within the game's constraints and storytelling mode, to signal that the character is a black woman would be, for instance, through haircare products. Just a comb for afro hair would do that job very quickly, very nicely. We could suggest other kinds of cultural and racial backgrounds through appropriate items, maybe clothing, maybe keepsakes, any kind of culturally relevant item. And we do this is done in 2013 when we unpack a menorah when we move into our first own home, and suddenly we find out that the protagonist is Jewish. And to be perfectly honest, unlike kind of the gender reveal in 2004, I do think that unpacking that menorah in 2013 for the first time and kind of going, oh wait, she's Jewish, I would have liked to see her Jewishness play more of a role and be more important throughout her life. And I can see the kind of narrative that you can construct out of, we didn't know this about her up until now. Now she has a menorah in her own house, and particularly because it's almost certain, I'm pretty sure that between kind of the previous chapter and this chapter, her mum has died. So it's kind of, she is re-engaging with her culture and with her heritage and with her family history and her religion. You can tell that story if you're paying attention to that kind of object. And so you could have told similar stories for other cultural backgrounds, other ethnic backgrounds as well. Now, the other interesting question is, could we still tell the same story with a black protagonist or a person of colour protagonist? And I think the answer to that is yes and no. But I would love to see those stories. I would love to see the bisexual hijabi woman or the black Jewish bi woman. And I would love to kind of think about, okay, what would be different? How would those stories be different? How could we express that within the constraints of the game and the gameplay? And we don't get to see those, which is a shame. Now, you know who unpacks their stuff? Refugees and economic migrants do. And this is not the story of a refugee or an economic migrant. This is very much a story of somebody who is living in the country that they were born in. But I think Unpacking would lend itself really well to a refugee story or an economic migrant story. The 1997 chapter where we unpack our first bedroom would look very, very different because, I mean, I was an economic migrant as a child. I had not dissimilar experience of kind of unpacking stuff into my first own bedroom at the age of 10, and that stuff was a handful of books and a handful of cuddly toys, because that's all that we had space for in the car. So that 1997 chapter might have been much shorter, and it might have raised the question for the player, for the audience, wait, why does this kid have so little stuff? And you could find other ways of then telling more of that story. And to me, that would be really, really interesting. But also, how would this character being an economic migrant or a refugee impact the rest of the story? Would they be able to do an art degree? Would their family push them into something notionally safer? What other changes might it cause to their life story, to their life trajectory? Now, here's another story that Unpacking doesn't tell, and it's of trans people and a trans character. After the gender reveal in 2004, have to admit I kept watching for things to change. Maybe for bras to turn into binders. I think it would have been lovely, honestly. Maybe we would get to another move and we would unpack a giant non-binary pride flag and hang it on a wall. Alas, no. Now, I think a transition story as part of this wider life story of a character, told through something Unpacking, would be amazing. It would be really neat. And no, it wouldn't have to be just about the character being trans, in the same way that Unpacking isn't just about the character being bi, or Jewish, or a struggling artist. And because Unpacking does a really good job of showing us a fully fleshed out character, a whole entire human, over different stages of their life, that kind of transition could have been part of the character in the same way that maybe a relationship was, or being a struggling artist and flipping burgers was, that was then placed in the context of their wider life and life trajectory. So why couldn't that person be trans? Now, something else that really struck me about Unpacking is the huge role that class and intergenerational wealth play in the game. Unpacking wouldn't be the same story if the character wasn't, one, from an upper middle class background, and two, on good terms with their family of origin. And we find out that they're from an upper middle class background in a number of ways. The most striking thing to me was, particularly through their early life, from kind of the first chapter through, I think, just after college, we get to unpack a series of tourist trinkets from different European cities. So the first one is a double-decker bus from London. We then get an Eiffel Tower and the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And that to me says, we went on trips to those places, probably with our parents, likely, even if it was on our own or with friends, they were part financed by our parents, given that after college we were flipping burgers, there's no way in hell we would have afforded a trip to Italy on our own, particularly if the game is set in Australia, but also if the game is set in North America. Those are big, expensive commitments that you don't do unless you kind of have the money, or have somebody who has the money. So that's kind of the upper middle class side of things. But also, that means that in those early stages of the character's life, if she weren't from an upper middle class background, anything from like art supplies in early childhood through to university and being able to do an art degree would have been a financial struggle that might not have, and a gamble that might not have paid off, and that therefore the character would have been less likely to take. And things from 2012 onwards would also look quite different if the character wasn't from a upper middle class background and if she wasn't on good terms with her bio family. because she wouldn't have been able to move back in with Mum after that failed relationship with mail order catalog sugar daddy. She wouldn't have had the inheritance to finance that first house purchase that also gave her kind of the space and the financial freedom to focus on her art, to stop flipping burgers and going from kind of doing low-paid work, unskilled work, to actually focusing on her art and being able to do something with it professionally. So Unpacking is very much a wish fulfillment fantasy and kind of a comfort game. And we have to ask ourselves, why is that kind of wish fulfillment and comfort predicated on material wealth and kind of family support? And that's not necessarily something that's the game's fault, the developer's fault. It is something that is, unfortunately, something that's deeply wrong with our society. But the game has chosen to reproduce that and not question it in any way. Now, this is where I get a little bit snarky. The first time I heard about Unpacking was with the whole GameCube kerfuffle. So if you didn't hear this, it was kind of all over social media and some of the nerdy gaming news shows that I follow. The character owns a GameCube through kind of several stages of her life. You get to unpack it a couple of times. And Gen Z players, younger players, were kind of really struggling to identify this object. What the hell is it? Is it a kitchen appliance? Does it go in the bathroom? What is this cube-shaped thing with a handle on the back? And honestly, I am of the age range where that probably is the target audience for Unpacking. But I've only ever seen like one GameCube in the flesh because I've never been a Nintendo gamer up until fairly recently, so I probably wouldn't recognise it without the whole kerfuffle. But it does make me wonder, particularly for younger players, whether the problem is not so much with the GameCube as with the life trajectory that Unpacking shows us that is completely inaccessible to younger people. Regardless, honestly, of family support and background, because of the way that the world is changing. Younger players can probably not see themselves or their future in this game and in this story. Now, something else that, in fairness, was alluded to in Unpacking, and that's why it made me think of it more, was disability. So in 2013, when we move into our first kind of own house after Mum has died, we unpack a walking stick. And my first thought was, wait, has the character acquired a chronic illness or a disability or an injury that means they now need a mobility aid? And eventually, as I thought about it more, as I progressed through the level and as I replayed the previous level and then realised, no, Mum has died, I realised we must have taken it as a keepsake. But also, as the character ages, we do kind of see signs of aging. We unpack, I think, in 2012, a pack of those heat patches for backache, so we clearly kind of have started getting age-related back pain. And in our last move, when we move into kind of the house that we share with the girlfriend and where we're expecting a baby, one of the things that we unpack in the study is a wrist brace for RSI and carpal tunnel issues. So the character clearly develops kind of age and work-related disability, but that's never really explored in any kind of depth in the game. It's kind of, we see those two objects, and beyond that, it doesn't really seem to have an impact on the character's life. That'd be too much of a downer, right? Okay, so we've talked about a bunch of stuff that Unpacking doesn't do, and that I honestly do wish it did at least some of those things. I think the storytelling modality really lends itself to telling some of those other stories that it chooses not to tell. But it's a queer story, right? I should be happy about that. So in 2015, a few years after kind of ending that relationship with the first boyfriend, the protagonist acquires a live-in girlfriend. And we know she's a girlfriend and we know she's cis because, like us, she has bras and menstrual products, right? And she ends up as our long-term partner at the end of the game. We've bought a house together. We're expecting a baby. in 2018, and that's kind of how the game ends. And if you're looking for bisexuality with forensic attention through the rest of the game, or with hindsight, you can kind of potentially see clues towards it. The interest in football, and the fact that she plays football actively and has won trophies in younger years. Stereotypical, but yes, in some ways it's difficult to use that kind of storytelling mode without, to an extent, falling back on stereotypes, and that's fine, right? I don't object to that in this particular case. We also see, like, through college and the early years after college, the character's clearly just wearing the standard bisexual uniform of plaid shirt and docks. Love it. And in 2013, when she moves into her own house, she acquires a pair of fabulous rainbow knickers. And so surely we've got on-screen bisexuality, we've got hints of that throughout her life. That must make me happy, right? Okay, you already knew I was a curmudgeon. The problem with bisexuality, as it is shown in Unpacking, is, well, it's two problems. One is that it's deniable. A whole bunch of people can probably just go, but no, surely she was a lesbian all along. And there's a whole, like, series of videos I could make on bi erasure and terrible bi representation in media, and how unless you use the word bisexual, everybody will just pigeonhole you into one of the other boxes. I have written book chapters about that, go read them, whatever. So yeah, it's deniable, and I don't particularly like that, but I'm going to yell about her being bisexual until people get it. But also, it has no actual impact on her life. You could swap out the girlfriend with a boyfriend who isn't a mail order sugar daddy, who's actually a decent human being, and nothing about the story would change. And so in my head, I have started dubbing Unpacking as queers too can get on the relationship escalator, the game. Now, if you haven't heard of the relationship escalator, it's this idea that there is only one valid, successful way for romantic relationships to progress in our society. You start dating, you move in together, maybe you buy a house, you get married, you have kids, you age together, you die together. That's the relationship escalator. You have to keep going up it. You can't stop at any point. You have to keep going. It's the only way to have a successful relationship. No other forms of relationships are allowed. And if you don't keep going and you stop, then that's a failed relationship, right? And the relationship escalator is bad, actually. It's kind of part of a whole bunch of ideas and discourses in our society that prop up a whole bunch of power structures. It props up the nuclear family, it props up cis heteropatriarchy, and those things in turn prop up capitalism, right? Again, could make a longer video about this, that's not what this is about, but that's what the relationship escalator is, and that's why it's bad. It also can trap people in really bad situations, in abusive relationships, in unhappy relationships, because they don't see an alternative. They think that this is how it's done and anything else is a failure. Honestly, being single is not that bad. Neither is being polyamorous. Neither is a whole bunch of other different ways of arranging your life. You don't have to couple up and be a nuclear family. You're not a failure because you haven't done that. But the relationship escalator is always there. So here's the thing, some queer people want to and do get onto the relationship escalator. But even so, queer lives are profoundly different to cishet lives. Queerness and societal queerphobia impact every aspect of our life. Our relationships, especially but not only with biofamily, our work, who we socialise with, the opportunities we have, the opportunities we choose to take and not take, and ultimately our life trajectories and outcomes. Our queerness is part of who we are our entire lives, not just as a plot twist in 2015, dear Unpacking. And queerness can be, and frequently is, profoundly subversive and radical. Many, not all of us, but many of us, organise our lives and relationships in ways that are antithetical to cis heteronormative patriarchy and to capitalism. And that's partly because historically we've been violently excluded from those systems and those structures, but also partly in rebellion to them, because ultimately they are violent structures of oppression and they should be rebelled against. So putting us, queer people, or this one bisexual character, on the relationship escalator in the way that Unpacking does, kind of does two things. One, for queer audiences, it offers us that vision of, hey, you too can be part of cis heteronormative patriarchy and of capitalism, and you can gain access to those power structures that have been historically oppressing you. You don't have to be radical and subversive anymore. It defangs us. And for cishet audiences, it presents a version of queerness that is made safe. Look, see? They're just like you. There's nothing radical or subversive about them. There's a decades-long history in queer spaces, in queer communities, of infighting about whether trying to assimilate into cishet social structures, into cis heteronormative patriarchy, into capitalism is a good thing. And you can probably tell from the rest of this video which side of that debate I fall on. And as a result, Unpacking to me isn't a queer story. It's a story of queerness defanged and domesticated. And it's a story of a character who comes from immense privilege, and largely through that privilege, she's able to gain joy and happiness and success and comfort in her life. I like the gameplay, I like the storytelling, I like the music. But I would really like to see different kinds of characters have different kinds of happy endings in media in general and in Unpacking specifically.